Okay, next I welcome Dr. Jess Steier, and she is joining us virtually today, and we are thrilled to have her share her expertise. She is the mastermind behind Unbiased Science, where she creates outstanding science-focused content across numerous digital platforms to keep people in the know and where they are spending their time, which is on their phone scrolling. And she'll guide us through the power of storytelling to help us connect with larger communities.
Okay, hi everyone. Oh boy, there I am. Special thanks to the organizers of this event for giving me the flexibility to join virtually. I'm so sorry. I have a personal situation that made travel a bit difficult for me. So let me go ahead and share my screen and hope that things don't explode here. Give me just 1 second. Okay. I don't know if I could hear you all, but I'm assuming you could hear my screen. Can someone give a thumbs up or just let me know? Or I'll just assume. I'm just going to jump in and assume that you all
We can hear
can
you
see my
just fine.
screen.
Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. So thank you for that introduction. I'm going to talk a little bit about how I've learned to communicate science. I'll give you a brief background on how I got into all this, because really my background, I'm a public health scientist. My training is in evaluation science, data science, using data to evaluate programs and policies. And then, come 2020, a little thing called the global pandemic hit, and people had a lot of questions about COVID, about vaccines. And so I launched Unbiased Science, thinking that it would, I always make this joke, but it's so true, thinking it would just be my mom and her friends following along as I shared information. But it's grown into this platform that reaches about 10 million people monthly, which is, I still can't really wrap my brain around that. And our goal is to share evidence-based information presented in an empathetic and as apolitical way as possible. We deliver content. I'll share with you some examples via social media infographics, videos. We have a weekly podcast. And we're also really leaning into long form content via Substack and Medium. And I just want to give a shout out to my amazing team. I'll be sharing some graphics today. I'm surrounded by other brilliant scientists, graphic designers, and communicators. So it is not just me. I also just wanted to share that, like most scientists, I did not receive any formal training in communication. I've sort of learned by being thrown into this world, learning by doing, seeing what resonates with people, and using a bit of my data evaluation background to gauge feedback and then integrate that in my communication style. And one other thing that I wanted to share is that I feel very strongly, I'm sure a lot of folks would agree, that the pandemic really changed everything. It kind of lifted the curtain on the scientific process. We have folks with no scientific backgrounds accessing PubMeds, talking about studies. I have, friends who have zero background in health or science talking about randomized controlled trials and placebos. So we're sort of forced to step up our game a little bit. So unfortunately, I can't see you all in the room, but I typically ask people by a show of hands, who here has been personally victimized by a wellness influencer spreading misinformation about health and science on social media? And I'm going to go ahead and imagine that you're all raising your hands right now. I see that the camera just turned on. I don't see hands raised, but usually there are a lot of hands raised. And I certainly have been personally victimized. So I wanted to jump in with a case study. I'm sure everyone in the room and on the line here has heard of the food babe. So I call it the Fruit Loops and the Food Babe effect. So back in January 2024, you may have seen this post that Vani Hari, the Food Babe, posted about Fruit Loops. Oh my goodness, what are we doing here in the US? We're poisoning ourselves. She posted about how Fruit Loops are banned in other countries, linked to cancer. And within just 2 days, the post was shared over 2 million times and caused major panic among parents. I must have received 1,000 direct messages from moms who thought that they were poisoning their children by giving them Fruit Loops every now and then. Fast forward to October 15th of 2024, there were protesters that gathered to demand the removal of artificial food dyes and preservatives in Kellogg's breakfast cereals. So, what did we do? So, this whole case study really helps illustrate our central challenge, right? It's bridging the gap between public perception and scientific reality. So, you probably can't see the details here. I'll zoom in just a moment. But we did an infographic that really walked through the science, and we did so using tidbits of science broken up with eye-catching visuals. I don't know if you all saw, but Eva Mendes, she actually reshared Vani Hari's post. And so we did a little play here with Fruit Loops and her sunglasses. And we did our best to respond to the chaos. So, what we found is that dismissing concerns widens the gap. And so we listened first, right? And we gave people the respect of actually addressing their concerns. So rather than just kind of waving them off and saying, oh no, this is all absurd, food colorings are not harmful, we actually got into the science of artificial dyes and BHT. So we identified the information gaps, we listened to questions, and we built the bridge to science. Here's some other slides from this particular infographic. I always say, and I'll say it till the day that I die, that public health and science need better PR. We need to take lessons from marketing and other communication specialists, right? If people only wanted the data and the science, they could read a textbook. Social media has changed things, and now it's a combination of really good information, hopefully, and entertainment value, right? And so social media has really changed the way that we communicate, and we have to lean into creative communication strategies. Just wrapping up this particular case study, I always like to bring up Brandolini's Law, which many of the folks I'm sure have heard of, but it's that the amount of energy needed to refute misinformation is an order of magnitude bigger than that needed to produce it. So it probably took the food babe 5 seconds to produce that post, and it took us weeks, countless hours to compile the best available evidence, figure out how to break it up into meaningful chunks, and then develop this graphic. So I say this, but of course, it's not like snap of a finger. I also wanted to highlight that people learn in different ways. And so while the infographics were great for some people, we also put out long form content. So these are two of several essays that we put out. So food dyes, can't we just get rid of them? Yes, we could, but should we? And we walk through the practical implications. What would this look like? What changes would need to be implemented in factories? How would this impact things like allergens and cost and production, things that maybe people aren't considering all the time? We talked about other countries and how they make food choices, and why saying that something is banned in Europe is A, not always accurate, and B, does not tell the whole story. So this is where we really get into the details. And I'll tell you that this type of content and messaging really resonates with a different audience. Typically, in my experience, older audiences tend to prefer this long form content and this level of detail. I also wanted to give a shout out, since the title of this talk is about storytelling. This is something I've really leaned into. I am not the smartest scientist. I don't think that I have all the technical wherewithal that many others have, but I do pride myself on being a good storyteller. And so in one of our Substack articles, I talked about this blue milk experiment, an elementary science fair, and how I was distributing blue milk to my classmates. And I got into the psychology of food coloring, and people loved it. I even went into my attic. I dug out this picture of me from an old science fair in the, I don't know, late 80s, early 90s, whatever it was. I talked about how I sometimes add food coloring to my, pancake batter, waffle batter, whatever it is. People like this because they were connecting with me. Not only am I a scientist, I'm a human, and I'm a parent, right? I'm a mom. And so this got their attention, and this sort of messaging really resonates with people. Of course, sometimes policy changes are based on public opinion, not science. Some people will say, oh, well, what does it matter if we have, the public on board? It comes down to policy change. And I always push back on that, because we know that public opinion matters and often is a driver of policy. So just wanted to, oh, Sorry. Oops. So sorry. I got an incoming signal and I'm trying to figure out how to turn that off. Give me one moment. Can you hear that? I hope you can hear that. If you can hear it, I'll just talk through it. Okay. So, oh, I see a chat here. Okay, perfect. Thank you for folks who chatted in here. I'm just going to ignore the ringing in my ear. So here's the anatomy of viral social media content. So I borrowed from our friend, the Food Babe, one more time. I hate to pick on her, but she gives us such great material for discussion here. So this post where she compares real food to processed food. And of course, she's using colors and she's using language, emotional triggers. She's talking all about, of course, one ingredient, organic mango. You could just picture the rainbows and butterflies coming out of this amazing organic mango bag here, where on the right, mango is pulverized and processed, and we add these terrible things. And oh my goodness, gums. You'd think that she's talking about guns, but no, she's talking about gums. So these are elements that make content go viral. So we're preying on people's fears. We make simple, well, not we, but people make simple, absolute statements. They appeal to parental instincts. They appeal to our desire for control and this idea that every single decision we make will have some clinically impactful, an impact on our health. Often an appeal to nature, which I heard in the previous talk. And of course, this secret truth narrative that, what are they hiding from us? What are they not telling us? So there's this information ecosystem, and we're not just fighting misinformation, right? We're competing with each other in an attention economy. So there's social media platforms, which is my primary outlet for science communication, but we're competing with others like the Food Babe and other wellness influencers that are not putting out good information. We're also competing with traditional media. We have clinicians who are trying to do messaging in their individual encounters. We have the scientific community, not all of whom have these public outlets, right? And we also have regulatory bodies. So I thought this was really interesting. There was this poll, I guess it's almost about a year old now, done by Healthline, and it found that over half of Americans who've tried a health trend, tool, or approach in the past year said that they found them on social media. And this is interesting to me because on one hand, I'm horrified, of course, if that's being driven by bad information. But on the other hand, it really gives us an opportunity. So it's a double-edged sword, social media, and I'm hoping that more of us could use it for good. In the interest of time, I'll just talk briefly about this slide, but there's a trust gap, right? We have the scientific reality, and key elements of that are regulatory processes, scientific consensus, evidence-based decisions, risk assessment frameworks, and then we have public perception, which we know is shaped by social media, personal experiences, cultural beliefs, emotional responses. And then many of us are sort of stepping up to try to fill that gap, right? And so we have trusted information sources like friends and family, social media influencers, health and wellness bloggers, and so on and so forth. And so, again, many of us are really stepping up to try to fill this gap, this trust gap between scientific reality and public perception. What I think is really interesting, so this came out of the 2024 Edelman Trust Barometer, and it was actually since updated, and I apologize for not updating the slide. But when asked to rank how much people trust, who do you trust to tell me the truth about new innovations and technology in health and science? People ranked scientists on par with their peers. So again, this really reinforces some of the tactics that I try to take, which is not just, leading with my expertise or weaponizing my credentials, but also framing it as I'm a mother, I'm a human, I'm an American, right? And to try to really have that relatability factor, because that goes a long way with people. So there are some gaps in science literacy that share themes. In the interest of time, I'll try to go through this pretty quickly, but there's a lack of fundamental science knowledge. So you'll see in the coming slides, I'll share an example: misconception of sugar composition of common sweeteners. There's vulnerability to logical fallacies. The appeal to nature is a big one that I heard mentioned in the last talk. Overconfidence in scientific knowledge, and a lack of understanding of research design and implications for validity and reliability. So, how does this translate to how we communicate? So, here are some other examples of some posts that we've put out on bias where we try to get at some of this. So, on the left here, we're walking through the sugar composition of honey versus table sugar versus cane sugar versus high fructose corn syrup, and just trying to combat this idea that they're wildly different and that one is healthier than the other. And also this idea that synthetic and natural flavorings are also wildly different, and that when someone hears natural, they tend to perceive that it's healthier or safer than artificial flavorings, but typically or often the chemical composition is exactly the same. Another very big issue is this misunderstanding of research design and the difference between in vitro and in vivo studies. And this comes up a lot when we're talking about food ingredients, food coloring. And I like to tell people, yeah, you can find a study, probably a preclinical study or in vitro study or something that showed some risk. But unless you're a rat being drowned in a vat of red dye, you probably don't need to worry, right? Because there is a fundamental difference between study types and human studies versus animal studies and so on and so forth. I'm very proud of this slide on the right, which of course illustrates this idea of correlation doesn't equal causation. Very classic example where we chart ice cream sales and shark attacks. And of course, we know that both of those surge in the summertime, but no, that does not mean that eating ice cream will cause shark attacks. And people like these playful takes. This brings these very fundamental scientific concepts to life for people. There's something called the risk perception gap. We like to call people's attention to how we tend to focus on certain things like individual food ingredients or additives or individual chemicals or organic versus conventional pesticides versus things that have a really meaningful impact on our health, right? So overall diet patterns, sedentary lifestyle, and so on and so forth. Also, it's helpful to tell stories. So here on the right, I give this example of how anecdotes are data points, but they're not evidence in and of themselves. So I shared a story of my friend who told me, he started the keto diet and it totally revolutionized his life. And I said, okay, interesting. That's great. Did you happen to make any other changes? And he started talking about, well, now that you say it, I cut out alcohol and I guess I started doing these beach walks with my dog every morning. And so, this helped me illustrate this idea of confounders and other variables. And again, using storytelling to illustrate some pretty fundamental scientific concepts. I find that a lot of my time and energy is spent talking about other countries and how they approach food safety. This comes up at least 100 times a day in my messages. Why do they do things different in Europe? Why are they banning this? And I'll explain, well, they might not actually be banning it, might be named something different in this other country. And actually we take, a different approach. Talking about the hazard versus risk-based approach and how neither is superior to the other, they're just different. And so really talking through the different approaches has helped people wrap their mind around why some of those differences exist. There's a lot of text on this slide, but I love giving a shout out to this great article that was published last September in NPR. And it was called "To Combat Misinformation, Start with Connection, Not Correction." And it all boils down to you can throw numbers and stats at data at people, but if they don't like you or connect with you first, they're probably going to tune you out. So I often lead with listening first. I talk about this on the next slide here, and forging some sort of a connection, finding some sort of common ground with people, right? So we like to build trust through understanding. So using that example that I gave with the food dye controversy and when the Food Babe post hit and my phone almost blew up with all of the million messages from concerned parents, we spent a day or two just monitoring conversations before we responded, okay? And then we took some time to really identify root concerns, common patterns. Okay, it was all about fear for children's safety, distrust of big food, confusion about regulations, environmental concerns, and so on. And we learned that, parents weren't just asking about food dyes, they were talking about these deeper fears about long-term effects on their children's health. So this really shaped how we sought to communicate. And so we acknowledged their concerns. We didn't dismiss them. We shared personal experiences. We used relatable analogies and we stayed human. So there was a video that I posted shortly thereafter, and I led it by saying, as a parent and a scientist, I understand the worry, but let's look at what the research actually tells us. Another thing, and a major shout out to my data viz graphic design team, is people appreciate context and real world application. When we throw out like odds ratios and risk ratios and statistics, they don't mean anything to people. So I'm sure you all recall it was the EWG made this big fuss about Cheerios and oatmeal. It was all about chlormequat and how it was endangering our children. And again, it was this idea that we're poisoning our children. So parents were in my DMs, they were horrified. And so we took a look at the actual toxicology and we did some calculations. And we determined that for an average adult, they'd have to consume 1,647 boxes of Cheerios in a single sitting. Okay. For oatmeal, we determined they would need to consume 202 canisters of Quaker oats in a single sitting. And by visualizing this, it made it more tangible for people. It helped them realize, like, okay, you're saying there could be risk, but I'm not at risk unless I consume this wildly impossible amount of these foods. So people loved this. We also do this with other things about like ingredients in vaccines. So here on the left, we talked about how there are 60 times more formaldehyde by weight in a pear than in any vaccine. Also, so proud of this post on the right. It's part of a larger post. We did a series on Girl Scout cookies because moms across America put out this report, and it scared the poop out of people about Girl Scout cookies. We were getting messages from moms saying that their daughters were being harassed outside of Stop and Shop, and there's poison in these cookies. And again, we took a look at the actual toxicology, crunched the numbers, and a child would have to eat over 9,000 cookies daily to reach a potentially harmful dose of glyphosate. I love Thin Mints. I'm not eating 9,000 cookies in one sitting. People also appreciate a dose of comedy and clever phrasing. So obviously, raw milk is in the news now. So we had this video that people really loved because everyone's like, oh, well, we didn't always pasteurize like back in the day. And it's like, yeah, back in the day, people were dying at 7 of dysentery, right? Nostalgia is not a public health strategy. They also like some of our clever titles and puns. So we say, don't raw dog it. Sorry if that's inappropriate to say at this meeting. Or H5N1 in raw milk, utterly unpasteurized and utterly unsafe. This gets their attention. This gets them engaged in conversation. Here, just really quickly, and I know I'm coming up on time here, but just briefly wanted to say that we also sometimes challenge some people's cognitive dissonance. So we'll say, so you're super concerned about cleanliness in your kitchen and germs, but then you'll drink raw milk, which often contains dangerous pathogens. Or you distrust big dairy companies that undergo rigorous inspections, but put complete faith in small farms that don't have that type of testing, and so on and so forth. And we try to get people to do a little introspection when we can. So I just wanted to wrap up. I know I alluded to this earlier, how people learn in different ways, and this really varies by demographic and it varies by platform. So our largest presence is on Instagram, which is a very visual platform, infographics, and we tend to reach a younger demographic, lots of, well, young-ish, right? The millennials, lots of parents live on Instagram. That's where they get their information. So the information we put out there is totally different than on TikTok, which reaches Gen Z and the very young people, and is obviously in a video format where you have literal milliseconds to hook them and get them to watch your video, which is also completely different than Facebook, right? Which is much more about long form content, sharing links to essays and media like articles. I'm saying long form content. And that tends to skew more older, more politically conservative. So I would also just throw out there that you should think about who you want your audience to be, who are you trying to reach, and that the platforms often dictate our content and how we deliver that content. Science without humanity is just a textbook. When we bring joy to the creation process, and I know this is easier said than done because there's so much going on, and many of us feel like, public health and science are on fire right now. But when we are passionate about this, when we put our hearts into this, the audience feels it and they can tell, they can pick up on authenticity, right? And the most compelling scientific stories are not just accurate, they are alive. We have a very long fight ahead of us, but I love to say that we are in this together in science. Really, really honored to be a part of this discussion and look forward to your questions and further discussion later on. Thank you so much.
Hi, Jess. Thanks so much. This was super interesting. I wanted to know more about your long form content and your essays. What platforms are you using to publish that?
Yeah, so using Substack primarily right now. Substack's great. It lets you hyperlink in text. They're also updating the actual platform. Now they are integrating more with video and podcasting, but Substack, which is really growing. And then I cross-post my Substack content to Medium as well. And Medium tends to reach a very different audience. I'd say Substack is reaching how do I phrase, like a more intellectually curious crowd. Medium is reaching a broader audience.
Hi, Jess. Thank you for that wonderful talk. I wanted to ask you, when you started out with content creation, especially in short form, how did you build confidence in making that content, and where did you start at all?
Oh my gosh, that is a really great question. And as someone who has imposter syndrome all the time, I don't know that I'm still 100% confident. I think something that helped me a lot is I always came with receipts, as they say, right? So everything I say, I'm always including sources, so I'm backing up with what I'm saying. I really try not to. Editorialize too much. And so that really helps me when I have the body of evidence behind me. So we also, just not to get too much to an aside, but the different platforms can make that challenging to share sources. So I know I mentioned our largest presence is on Instagram, which you probably know doesn't allow you to hyperlink, which makes that really challenging. So we'll have to sort of get around that by putting all of our sources in comments and pinning them. We also created this database, the searchable database that folks can search by keyword and locate all of our sources. But that took time, that took infrastructure, that took a team. But I'd say one other thing I'd add is there's really an incredible community of science communicators now, and we lean on each other, we support each other. So that's also been very helpful.
Jess, there's one question online, and it basically was, did you see the piece that the Food Babe did on carrageenan, and did you have any comments on it if you did see it?
I haven't seen this particular attack, but it's almost formulaic in how she and others in the wellness community tend to vilify these specific ingredients. They'll pull some study, like I said, typically in vitro or preclinical, some obscure study, and they'll completely take it out of context. They'll ignore that we need to specify, as I know everyone in the room knows, the dosage, because of course the dose makes the poison. So it follows that same pattern. It feels like we're putting out the same fire over and over again. And unfortunately, as I said, I don't think enough people are aware of that formula that she and others are using. And so it can be very tiresome to go after each and every one of these attacks as they crop up, but they're really all the same. I don't know if folks in the room agree. I wish I was there to discuss with you, but they all follow that same pattern.
So I'm going to follow up. So what's the solution to this? Because it's like playing whack-a-mole.
I wish I had the solution on a grand scale. I think that we need to figure out, honestly, an infrastructure for science communicators, because just to put it all out there, everyone is very critical, of course, of funding, right? And it's so interesting that we as science communicators, if we accept a penny, everyone is extremely critical of that. And of course, we have all these safeguards in place. We have scientific and editorial control. We're always bringing, our sources and our receipts, as I said. Whereas the wellness influencers, they're banking, right? They're making bank. They accept money freely, and people don't seem to be as critical of the detox teas and the supplements. And that leads many of us to do this in our spare time as a passion project or as a public service. And that has to change. And I don't have an easy answer to that. I'll tell you that I am one of many science communicators where we're trying to band together and formalize and advocate for ourselves and figure out how we could do this in a sustainable way. But we have to keep. I'll tell you that the Unbiased Science platform, I'm super proud of it. It continues to grow, and not just mine, but many other scientific communicator platforms. So yes, we're competing with a lot of very loud voices who have a lot of money and time, whereas many of us don't. But we have to keep this up. And we also, sorry, last thing, and I apologize if I'm running over, is we have to push ourselves to break out of our own echo chambers. It's very easy to talk to other science-minded folks, but it's not so easy to talk about people who maybe don't align with us or agree with us. And so I know, like I just did an essay for the Times, and that's great, but the Times tends to be left-leaning. Now I want to get out there and publications that might reach a completely different audience. I want to have conversations with people who don't always agree. And I actually, if folks are interested, I wrote a Substack that came out today about how I was at a bar and I had this conversation with four guys about the conversation was about COVID and mRNA, but I talked about how it was so uncomfortable for me. Honestly, I really pushed myself to have this conversation. But at the end of the conversation, we shook hands, and I don't know that I revolutionized or totally changed what I thought, but maybe I planted some seeds. And so that's the other thing. It's not always going to be big, rapid change, right? We have to have these conversations and push ourselves to be a little bit uncomfortable and not only talk to those people who agree with us.
Any other questions before we take a break? Okay, if not, we're going to take a break till 3 o'clock. Jess, don't go anywhere because we want you part of the panel discussion. And we'll reconvene at 3 o'clock.
Thank you, everyone.